Today, we're diving into the world of SaaS and security with Jonathan Steele, founder of Steele Fortress. So, get ready for an eye opening discussion on how businesses can fortify their digital defenses in an increasingly complex threat landscape. So, with that, Jonathan, welcome to the Software Spotlight.
Thanks for having me, Michael. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, great to have you here. I know it sounds like a lot of areas that you're touching on over there to help individuals and businesses protect their details and security online. And I was hoping you could give our listeners a little bit of background on yourself and what has brought you to the solution that you're providing today.
Sure. I am a Chicago born and raised native. I have a family law practice that I've been in for about 12 years at this point. We do divorce, paternity, prenups, postnups, you name it. And that's my 9 to 5 for the most part, to the extent it ever actually stops. And as of recently, so in the last year or so, I've started a company called Steele Fortress that offers privacy and cybersecurity consulting services and some hands-on services as well, aimed at assisting clients with hardening their cybersecurity, hardening their devices, making themselves a little bit less vulnerable of targets, and then helping them to manage their data and their privacy and to navigate a very complex landscape that's getting worse when they don't have the time or the desire or the knowledge to do so themselves.
And I would think that probably a lot of your existing clients and obviously new clients that are coming to you through the new business are finding that it's a tough road to navigate on their own. So it sounds like you're really providing a lot of expert guidance along the way.
That's my experience so far. Obviously with the divorcing clients, people come in with, call it suspicion, call it paranoia, what have you. I suppose it depends on whether they're right. But they come in and they're worried that their spouse has access to their devices, that they have access to their data and their photos and their messages and their emails. And so they come in vulnerable and they come in looking for guidance, help me unplug that access, help me harden the devices and my data so that it stops, help me tweak the settings on my social media, because as much as I try, I can't get clients to get off of social media. And so, I help them navigate that. And so there's certainly an overlap between my law practice and the Steele Fortress business.
Yeah, and I'm sure, at the point where someone ends up in your office, it's not where they ever expected to be. No one gets married with the expectation of getting divorced. But the reality of it is that is exactly the situation. So what are some of the core features of the solution or the services you're providing through your Steel Fortress, business?
So yeah, we have 4 different price tiers, and depending on which tier you find yourself, that's how thorough of protection you're going to get. But they all have similar components to each of them. And then there's a business component that is specifically tailored towards small business. But just categorically, I'd say the first one, we sort of work from the inside out. So we start with a physical security assessment of a client's home or their business, as the case may be. And that's assisting them with, picking a home or a business security service, whether that's ADT or what have you. And then, helping them navigate surveillance systems, obviously leaning towards the more privacy-friendly ones. So
Sure.
We're not steering them towards Nest products or Ring cameras. We lean more towards self-hosted IP cameras. So what I like a lot is like a Synology system that we're recording locally on site. And so you can really get granular with the access that you're giving to those systems. And then we go from the home surveillance or the business surveillance out to the network. And so we implement usually a next generation firewall protection. I lean in mostly towards Sophos. I'm comfortable with their comprehensive offering. I like that they integrate well with endpoint protection. So we will put normally a Sophos firewall at the perimeter of either a business or a home, and then we set up a Sophos endpoint protection on the client's devices, whether it's their computers or their phones. And so the firewalls communicate with the devices. It helps to isolate devices that are in bad health status, are compromised in some way. And then we help clients to navigate, tweaking their account settings. So whether that's their bank accounts, their email accounts, their insurance accounts, so that they are using the strongest forms of multi-factor authentication that are available, so that their privacy settings are as secure as possible. We help them navigate where possible and where legitimate to use pseudonyms for as many accounts as possible, so that in the event of a data breach, their personally identifiable information isn't exposed. We implement mobile device management on mobile devices so that we can harden the security settings on their devices and tweak them remotely as things change over time. We offer identity protection, where we are helping them navigate personally identifiable information removal from data brokers and other publicly accessible databases. And we offer them consulting services to help them pick from the vast sea of email providers and cloud storage providers, so that they're landing on options that are privacy respecting and as are security focused as possible, so that their data is protected, so that their devices are protected, so that their homes are protected, their families, their businesses, and so that they can sleep well at night. And by doing that, with the lawyer hat and the lawyer nod, they sleep well at night knowing they're not dabbling in any gray areas. To somebody that understands privacy and security, you probably know using a VPN is perfectly legitimate, but there are illegitimate uses of it depending on what you're doing with it. And so it can get a bad reputation. And so some clients, whether they're executives or wherever they fall in the corporate ladder, they may have some genuine concerns. Am I jeopardizing myself? Do I have some criminal exposure if I'm using a VPN, or if I'm using pseudonyms when I sign up for services? And so they find value in the fact that a lawyer is signing off on all the strategies that are being implemented.
Makes good sense. And more often than not, are you finding that clients are looking to be protected from known entities or unknown entities, or a little bit of both?
It's both. I think there's a genuine and probably well-founded concern about big tech. How much information am I giving to Google? How much do they know about me? How much of a profile are they able to put together based on scanning my emails and seeing all my receipts and everything?
Sure.
But then it's also just a fear of the unknown. We don't know what we don't know, so we don't know, what the next threat is that's coming down the pipe. And so it's both. It's largely both.
And is the service provided as a one-time service, or is it more of a recurring type of service that someone would be paying for monthly or quarterly or annually, or how is it done?
Yeah, it's an ongoing monthly subscription. Most of the clients keep the monthly subscription going just because a lot of the settings, whether you're talking about a firewall or you're talking about device settings, need tweaking over time. And so
Sure.
they don't want to necessarily get into the weeds of firewall rules and things like that. So most of the clients do end up staying as monthly subscribers.
So you're really there with them every step of the way. It sounds like a very comprehensive solution.
Yeah, we try to offer that as that peace of mind. It's like insurance. You keep it there for the unknown and to protect yourself. And nowadays with cybersecurity, it's not an if question of when you're going to be breached or hacked. It's a when question.
Yeah.
And so you can't be 100% secure. You can't be 100% private, but you can be more secure and you can be more private than the person next to you. And that's really what it's all about, is just being a harder target.
Makes sense. Makes sense. And, as an organization, obviously you're in a very interesting field that's evolving, as you said. How do you stay ahead of some of the emerging threats and concerns as they're coming to light? Is it an important component to what you're doing?
It's research, it's education, and it's interest. Because I'm interested, it keeps me on my toes. It keeps me focused on continuing to learn. Obviously, the big buzzword of the day is AI, and so we implement AI across the board. We use AI solutions in our home surveillance assessments. All the cameras that we set up use AI detection. All of the firewalls that we set up use AI for network traffic analysis, for threat detection, for incident response. And so, we lean heavily on artificial intelligence for both businesses and for individual customers. And, it's just a matter of staying on top of the news, staying on top of forums, and continuing the education. There's no shortage of available certifications and programs for learning and trying to stay on top of it. And you do the best you can. You
Sure.
stay ahead of it.
Now, do you take clients from across the country, or just in a specific region, or around the world, or what's the geography that you work within?
We don't have any geographic restrictions. We're happy to help people wherever. The one caveat to that is that with the physical assessments, so the home security or the business security, that may involve a travel component. But unless somebody's willing to say, I want to pay you to come travel to me to do an assessment, you may end up being limited to network, account, device, privacy protection. So that's really the only limitation, is the physical assessment.
Got it. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. And do you see, like when you're working with businesses, for example, do you see like some common mistakes that you see businesses making certain assumptions that are common across different organizations that are challenging?
Many, unfortunately. That there's maybe it's a IT is as resistant to change as law, but because of that, there's a tendency towards Microsoft. There's a tendency towards Google as email providers, as service providers. And from a security perspective, well, I'll put Microsoft aside for a second, but from a security perspective, Google is great. From a privacy perspective, Google is horrible. And so, for a business to say we're going to use Gmail as our email provider, there's a concern that I have. Anytime you're using a service where you're under the impression that your data is encrypted, but that's half the picture. Is it encrypted where Google has the encryption keys? Because that's the case. And when that's the case, it's you, the recipient, and Google that is privy to the communication. And a lot of businesses, they don't really understand that. They don't really understand what they're jeopardizing when their emails, for instance, are not end-to-end encrypted, when their cloud storage is not end-to-end encrypted. And so, if you're a law firm, a lot of law firms are using Outlook. A lot of law firms are using Microsoft 365. I see some law firms that are using Gmail. You see healthcare companies that are doing the same, and they're even in a more precarious situation because they have HIPAA obligations, which is
Right.
pretty stringent in its penalties. And so anytime you're responsible for maintaining confidentiality or privilege, and you are using services that are not end-to-end encrypted, I think you're in a tricky situation. And then I think nowadays, as I mentioned, that AI is just on the brink of expansion every day. Companies more and more are just, they're going all in, not really understanding what they're doing, not really understanding the repercussions, not really understanding who owns your data once you throw it into a chat GPT or a llama chat window. And so, they don't really understand that you're giving up client confidentiality and privacy when you throw it into an AI model. Maybe your data is being used to train the model. And,
Sure.
there's some inherent concerns with using AI, and I don't think companies are really doing their diligence in figuring out what exactly they're jeopardizing by doing that. So I do have concerns, and it's a lot of it is big tech focused, and it's there are better solutions. And so I try to move businesses towards end-to-end encrypted providers. I'll push some businesses onto Proton Mail's suite, where their internal emails are all encrypted and their cloud storage is end-to-end encrypted. And then they're checking all the boxes. Then, they're doing the best they can. And if there's a breach, they know that they did as thorough a protection for their customers' data as they could.
Yeah, and I think, as organizations are looking for some cyber insurance policies and things like that, I think a lot of organizations don't realize, as they're filling out these applications for coverage, that if they're not complying with all of the requirements of the insurance policy that they signed up for, they're not covered. And I think that's an interesting area. Obviously getting a lot of businesses through, doing more than just checking the boxes, but actually going through and taking a lot of the steps they need to take to be sure that they're compliant is important.
I 100% agree. And, the cost of cyber insurance is skyrocketing. And so to be paying a heavy cost for that and then not be covered because you're not taking the necessary precautions to protect yourself is a lose-lose proposition. So
Yeah. Can you walk me through, for a new client coming aboard with your solution, what a day in the life might look like from when they first get onboarded until they're up and running, like how that journey looks?
yeah, so some of that's going to hinge on which service tier you're at. In terms of how hands-on we are, as opposed to are we just offering you the tools to do it yourself. But a lot of it also is dependent on how your cybersecurity posture is when you're coming in. If you're coming in like most people, you're using Gmail, you're using maybe SMS based two-factor authentication, a lot of places, if at all. And maybe you're using your dog's name with an @ symbol somewhere in there for your password for everything. And so that's where we're starting. Our onboarding is a pretty comprehensive intake form where we're trying to tease out where your vulnerabilities are. We're doing a vulnerability scan of you to see how do we prioritize the cleanup so that we're closing as many doors as possible to vulnerable information. And, the end goal, if I could choose for people, I'd get them off of Gmail and onto Proton Mail or Tuda. But, it's a friction point, right? So some people just, knowing the risks, still choose Gmail. And so I can't change people's minds all the time as much as I try. And so then it's just a question of how do we set up your Gmail in a way that it's as privacy focused as possible and as hardened as possible. And so then we'll steer them towards like Google's advanced protection program. We'll try to get them to start using hardware security keys wherever those are available. If I can get people to change their banks to a bank that is cybersecurity focused and allows hardware security keys, I'll do that. So it starts just with a security assessment, pretty, as I mentioned, a comprehensive intake process and intake form. We'll have a consultation, whether it's virtual or in person, where we'll talk through some of the vulnerabilities that we see as a result of the intake form. And then we'll try to work with the client to come up with as frictionless of a way as possible to start implementing better practices. We'll move them on to password managers, start changing their passwords to unique ones and ones that are a little bit more complicated than just a dictionary word with a couple numbers in there.
Sure.
And then, start implementing hardened practices. We'll move them to better multi-factor authentication. We'll try to get them onto a better email provider if we can. We'll try to get them onto VPN usage on their devices if they'll allow us. And we'll try to get a firewall into their environment as soon as feasible. And sometimes that's just a matter of mailing them a pre-configured firewall to make it just plug and play.
Great. Now, it sounds, you've definitely jumped into a very challenging field, but there's a huge need for what you're doing, and it's obviously, if it's done correctly, it can really help a lot of people. And is it more businesses or individuals that you're seeing on your platform getting up and running with your solution?
From the start, it's been mostly individuals. It's been families. There's been a huge surge of interest in families, that people that are worried about hardening the devices that they're putting in their kids' hands. That's a huge blind spot that people are trying to put a belt and suspenders on and make sure that their kids' devices are safe.
Sure.
So that was the majority of the initial customer interest. But it's starting to expand into businesses because a lot of the family customers have small businesses that they operate. And so they're seeing the value in their personal life. And so they're asking us to extend their protection into their small businesses and to offer them similar protections for their data and for their privacy in the business context.
And are you starting to see some trends emerging across the cybersecurity landscape in terms of the ways in which your customers are being impacted?
It's just increasing in frequency, I think. Obviously, it's no surprise to anyone in the cybersecurity world, but phishing is the most common attack, and then there's like business email compromise. And phishing emails are just getting harder and harder to detect. It's not the Nigerian prince reaching out for a wire transfer anymore, or somebody sending you an email that's broken English that's pretty easy to tell didn't come from Apple. Now, people anywhere in the world are throwing ChatGPT written emails at you, and those are much harder to detect. And so I think phishing is becoming a lot more prevalent. And we get emails from clients that are saying, I clicked a link, now what? And that seems to be increasing in frequency, and I think it's going to continue to increase in frequency as time goes on. I think, that's the direction we're headed. I think the next war this country fights is going to be a cyber war. So, I think it's going to continue to increase in frequency and severity. It's like every time I turn on the news, there's another data breach. So it's going to continue.
I think look at this morning's news with
CrowdStrike.
what happened. Yeah, that I don't know if that was specifically a data breach as much as maybe a poor update, but obviously it impacted a lot of computers. So, and from what you're doing there, what kind of sets your solution apart from maybe some of the other alternatives that individuals may be looking at for their solutions?
I think it's the comprehensiveness. There's certainly firewall solutions. I think you can pick any one of the service offerings that we offer bundled, and buy them individually. I think you can buy a Sophos firewall. I think you can buy an MDM solutions for your devices. You can go to a service like Join Delete Me to remove personally identifiable information. But to have one centralized service that's offering every one of those solutions in a bundle that's as easy as filling out one of these intake forms, and not to be overlooked is, again, the value of having the blessing of a lawyer signing off on everything you're doing is legitimate. Everything you're doing is in compliance with the law. You're not dabbling in a gray area by implementing any of the strategies that we're using to protect your data. I think that's a huge differentiator from any of the privacy or cybersecurity services that I've seen offered.
Very good. No, that makes a lot of sense. And as far as the different credit reporting agencies and things like that, obviously a lot of the solutions out there kind of deal with things after an attack. But even just locking your credit with the different credit agencies is a good way to prevent breaches before they happen. Are you kind of looking at things holistically from maybe like a before and after standpoint in terms of the services to help the clients make sure that they're resilient at both ends?
Yeah, clients will often ask, should I buy credit monitoring solutions? Whether LifeLock, there's no shortage of those either. And I'll usually tell people no, that you're better off on the preventative end of freezing your credit, because the credit monitoring services, what they do is they tell you after it's too late. Maybe they're offering you some insurance protection, assuming you meet all their qualifications, but at that point, it's too late. At that point, your data's out there. At that point, somebody already has your social security number. They've already opened lines of credit, and you can freeze, as you mentioned, you can freeze your credit with all three of the credit reporting agencies, and ward off any of those attacks from happening in the first place. And you're way better off doing that. Nowadays, most of them, Experian in particular, hides that pretty well on their website, and they hide it behind something called credit lock and fraud alerts and paid services that they want you to pay into for the same protection, maybe less protection. But the credit freeze is the best way to go about that, and it's free, and it's an easy thing to do, and it's, people worry, okay, well, now I want to open a bank account. Now I want to open a credit card or a mortgage. My credit's frozen. Well, you can thaw it for a day. You can thaw it for a week. There's really no downside to freezing it, but there's a ton of downside to leaving your credit unfrozen. So we do try to look holistically. We do try to look preventatively as opposed to trying to remediate, because I think people come to us sometimes because they've already been hacked. Their data's already been leaked, and we'll do the best we can in terms of cleanup, but an ounce of prevention, that saying is 1,000% true. Once your data's out there, it's too late. Once you've been hacked, it's too late. So doing something on the preventative end is definitely worth the cost.
No, very good advice. And you kind of alluded to it earlier in our conversation, but can you talk a little bit more about the role of AI and machine learning in your offerings? Because I think that sounds like a very important component.
Yeah. So there's two main areas that it's being leveraged in our offering. So the surveillance systems that we implement will use camera systems that leverage AI. So whether that be in a business context where the camera is doing on-device assessments of license plates or faces to determine, should this car be in this location? Should this face be in this location? And it's using artificial intelligence to make those assessments on device in real time, and then to trigger alerts based on those assessments. So in the surveillance category, it's very valuable. And then in the device and network protection category, it's also valuable. So the firewalls that we're implementing are using machine learning. They're not the traditional firewall where you're doing signature based tests, or you're basically seeing, is this threat something that we have seen before, and if it is, we'll block it. Machine learning firewalls are using information about your network's traffic. It's doing real-time traffic analysis. It's doing real-time log analysis to determine, are your devices anywhere on your network doing things that they shouldn't be doing? Is your IoT toothbrush uploading data? Is your vacuum downloading data? Things that they shouldn't necessarily be doing. And it'll cut off that access. It will isolate those devices from the rest of the network. It will inform the other devices that have endpoint protection on your network not to communicate with some of these some of the devices on your network that it has determined to be at risk based on some of the traffic that it's producing. So the firewall is sort of the command post there. It's doing a lot of the monitoring, and it's working together with all of the rest of the endpoint protection, and it's using real-time analytics to do so. And that's giving it a huge advantage over traditional firewalls that are not leveraging machine learning.
Great. Well, as we're wrapping up, for anyone that's listening to the episode, we're obviously going to leave a link in the show notes and all of that. But are there some good next steps as they're considering getting started with your solution?
Certainly, reach out to us. We're happy to do a free consultation to let you know what kind of services we can offer to you and to your business. And maybe you'll find value in the consultation alone. Maybe you'll find value in some of the advice we're willing to give you during a consultation. And just keep in mind that when you're hacked, when your data is leaked, it's too late. So now is the time to try to figure this out, and not after the fact.
No, it sounds like great advice. Well, talking about security and all of that, coming up next Wednesday, we have our cybersecurity webinar, and we'll have some top experts on that webinar from a whole range of different SaaS solutions. So be sure to join us next Wednesday at 1. If you're not already signed up for that, go to softwareoasis.com, and you can sign up for our newsletter to receive updates, including the update for that webinar. And once again, Jonathan Steele from Steele Fortress, thank you so much for joining us on the Spotlight today.
Thanks so much for having me. It was great.
Okay, stop that. Yeah, I think that was good.